So we are starting a new worship series today called Testimony. And for most of this series, all through the month of June, I'm going to be interviewing some members of our congregation about their faith journeys. I have lined up Mark Onimus and Amanda Grubel and Mary Jane Brown and Steve Thayer. And if you find that you also would like to be interviewed and would also like to tell your story, let me know, and we'll just do another round of these sometime. I've already had someone mention to me that they would like to be asked. So if you find this interesting, we'll just keep going. But I wanted today to start off by being an example, by being the first guinea pig of this series, and by sharing my story, or at least the part of my story that feels most important now. Because after all, after 7.5 years of being your pastor, it seems appropriate that you should find out why I'm this way. I grew up in a church a lot like this one. First Congregational United Church of Christ in Platteville, Wisconsin. It was a small church in an old building, an established church right on the town square. And I did all of the church things that you do when you're a kid and church is important to at least one of your parents. I went to the nursery, and I went to our little Sunday school. As I grew, I sat in the sanctuary. I participated in our little occasional youth group. I went through confirmation. Occasionally, I tried singing in the choir, or I did special music. I was in every nativity play, usually as a sheep, because that was safest. But I'm going to tell you that I didn't really like church. I wasn't against it, but most of what church was to me growing up was getting up early on a Sunday morning and putting on the world's least comfortable clothes and going to this place and sitting on a hard wooden pew and listening to someone drone on about this Jesus guy. Sorry, Pastor Joan. I wasn't into it. It wasn't my thing. I would have rather slept in on a Sunday morning. I would have rather played outside. I would have rather done just about anything else. And I tried most weeks to convince my parents that it would be more fun to not go to church. Platteville is a university town, and one of the philosophy professors from the university went to our church. And my senior year of high school, he taught a class at the church for the high schoolers. Not the middle schoolers, not the grown-ups, just for the high schoolers. And it was on world religions and philosophy. So we read about and we talked about Judaism and Christianity and Islam, and Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism. We read some ethics and some political theory. We got a real education in the study, the library of our church that sat right behind the sanctuary. And I loved it. I enjoyed it. I went every week. I read the stuff. I talked about the stuff. And when I graduated from high school and headed off to Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, I went off to Knox College in Galesburg and Illinois to major in philosophy with a concentration in ethics and religion. I need to be fair. That sounds like a weird thing to do. This was the time when there was the big philosophy boom of the late 90s, and all of the big white shoe philosophy firms were hiring. I did not foresee the collapse of philosophy that happened right before I graduated in 2000. But I went with an open mind and an open spirit, and I went to learn. I am an introvert. The first week or so of college was hard. I was far from home and far from my friends, and my roommate and my suite mates were okay, but I was kind of waiting to be invited into something. Every introvert needs a good extrovert to come and find them and take care of them. And during orientation, I met the folks who would invite me in to something. Two different groups of folks, actually. The first was the jazz ensemble, more on them later. The other was the Christian group on campus. I've talked about them before, and I've avoided naming them because I don't want to shame them. I know that other people have had good experiences with this organization. I know that other people at Knox have had good experiences with this chapter of that organization, but it was InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, which is not in any way whatsoever like First Congregational United Church of Christ in Platteville, Wisconsin, or, to the best of my awareness, like any other congregation of the United Church of Christ anywhere on earth. But they invited me in. And so I went in and I tried it. It wasn't the church that I knew. The things that they said did not match up the droning sermons about this Jesus guy. They were a different sort of thing and a different sort of Christian, and they had a lot of beliefs that seemed really important, really essential, that didn't match up with what I understood about God or Jesus or the Holy Spirit or the church. It seemed like in order to be on the inside, you needed to believe in the infallibility of a plain reading of the Bible. You needed to believe in the penal substitutionary atonements that Jesus had gone through. You needed to believe that there is a real, actual, literal hell, full of people being consciously tormented for all of eternity. And that was where most of the people who I knew were going. All of those people who practiced other religions, or no religion, of course. All of those people who claimed to be Christian but weren't really Christian, of course. Everyone who is lesbian or gay or bisexual or trans, of course. Hell was going to be full. And it seemed like you had to have a real, absolute, for sure conversion experience. A moment where even if you had grown up in the church, even if you had been baptized as a child, you needed to fall on your knees with tears streaming down your face, begging God to forgive you for being the wretched, terrible, awful soul that God had created you to be. And that didn't sit right with me. That didn't work for me. But these were the people who had invited me in. These were the folks who I was hanging out with a fair chunk of the time. These were the friends who I watched movies with and talked to and argued with. This was the group from which the girl that I was dating came from. And so I tried. And I argued and I debated and I worried. And I read ahead on the songs to make sure that I wouldn't sing the line that I didn't believe. I tried to readjust whatever this relationship I had was with whoever this God and Christ was. I tried to readjust my understanding of how Scripture worked. I tried to find it within myself to feel bad enough about myself to fall on my knees with tears streaming down my face, begging God for forgiveness. And I just couldn't do it. This came to a head when the girl who I was dating broke up with me. And I need to put two caveats on this story. Caveat number one, bullet dodged. Got over it, much happier, met Mariah, perfect life. The other caveat is that the reason that she broke up with me was there was another guy who she was interested in. I checked. They're married. They live in St. Louis. Good for them. But the reason that she told me she was breaking up with me, after 2 years of dating, after feeling kind of serious, the reason that she told me she was breaking up with me was that there was no point in investing more in this relationship when obviously we weren't going to spend the rest of eternity together because she was going to heaven and I was bound for hell. I remember that night pretty well. And I remember going back to the jazz house where I was living. Remember the jazz ensemble? A little culty, a little less culty than InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. I went back and I said to one of my housemates that we had broken up. And I was underage, and that housemate immediately went and got me alcohol. It was a little bit of a sign of care. And a little bit unorthodox, and a little bit strange, but also a ritual that a lot of people have to go through at one point or another. And as I was thinking about this week and looking back on things this week, I was thinking about how I felt through all of this. Because I felt a lot of things, and I still feel a lot of things. I still carry the residue of all of this with me. I felt a lot of things hanging out with those Christians. I felt judgment. I felt condemnation. I felt fear. I felt sorrow. But what I didn't feel, what I absolutely did not feel, what wasn't there, what feels like it was never there, was love. And I knew in my heart, I knew in my bones from those droning sermons from my childhood, sorry, Pastor Joan, that if God is anything, God is love. If you don't know love, you don't know God. If you know love, you know God. If you abide in love, if you wrap yourself up in love like a burrito, then you abide in God. And I wasn't sure of that at the time, but I knew whatever I had just experienced was not the God who I knew just a little. And so I walked away. I still had an academic interest in religion. I still enjoyed the games of theology and philosophy of religion. So I buried myself in classes. And I buried myself in the jazz ensemble. I was already living in the jazz house. I was already playing in the band. I was already in some combos. I was already at Cherry Street every Thursday night from 8 to midnight, sitting in whenever I could. And there I found love and care. There I found people who would care for me and who I cared for. Folks who would make room for me when I needed room and who would call me out when I needed called out, would call me in when I needed called in, would say good job, whether I did a good job or not. I found a home. And I stayed in that home for a while, and I graduated with my degree, ready to head off to the white shoe philosophy firms. I ended up working in a kitchen as a prep cook and a line cook and a dishwasher and a whatever I was asked to do that day. And it was a hard kitchen. It was a kitchen where the chef had gone to the Culinary Institute of America before it was cool to go to the Culinary Institute of America, and had gotten his culinary education by having it yelled into him. And so he yelled. And sometimes, never at me, threw things. But it was a paycheck, and there was rent, and there were student loans. So I would walk to work every day. And I found myself praying, God, just get me through this. And every day I would pray. And every day I would go to work, and every day I would get through it. And as hard as I am on that chef, the fact is he was very supportive when I needed support, as were the rest of the staff when I needed support. They drove me to be better at what I was doing. They gave me a work ethic that came out of nowhere. And one day on the way to work, I heard that little voice. That little voice that so many people hear that said, hey, have you thought about seminary? I mean, I know you don't really go to church. I know you're not really hanging out with the Christian folks, but maybe seminary? It's school at least, and it's academic at least, and maybe something will happen and the voice will keep talking. So I went to seminary. And that's a story for another time. But the reason that I'm telling you this part of the story, this little bit of why I am the way that I am, is partly because it's formative. But it's also because when I was at that low point where God had been stolen from me, the Presbyterian Church in Galesburg did not find me and invite me. Neither of the two Lutheran churches Evangelical Lutheran Church in America in Galesburg found me and invited me. The big, ornate Congregationalist church right on the town square did not find me and invite me. I even went there a few times and sat in the back and went in and got out without talking to anyone. And I know that there are, I believe, 8 churches in DeWitt. One is Catholic. One is a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. 2 are mainline, the Methodists and us. The rest range from the slightly conservative to the extremely conservative. And the reason that I talk so much about justice, the reason that I talk so much about including the marginalized, the reason I talk so much about the LGBTQ folks and the immigrants and the imprisoned and all of those people, the reason that I talk so much about all of that is not just because Jesus stood up in a synagogue and said what he was about. I'm here to bring good news to the poor and recovery of sight to the blind. I'm here to free the oppressed and break every last yoke. It is also because I know that in DeWitt, there are a bunch of people who are just as lost as I was, looking for someone who would invite them into this thing, this weird, strange, crazy thing that is the church, that is the united church of Christ, that is the inclusive church, that is the church that says God is love. No matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. There is no fine print. There are no footnotes. It is because I know that there are people hungry for a place where Mark and Steve and Amanda and Mary Jane and Ruth and Marty and Ralph and all of us can be together in love, caring for each other and letting that love spill out to the rest of the community and the rest of the world. I talk about it because I needed it. And because I know other people need it. And I am convinced that there are so many who are spiritual introverts, who are just waiting for an extrovert to come and find them and invite them in to God's reign of love.